Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the Dark Oak. In today's episode, we uncover details in the very volatile case of Kendrick Johnson's unexplained death. Was it an accident or is foul play involved?
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month, through our charity called the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. To find out how you can be a part of the movement, head over to thedarkoak.com or stay with us until the end of the episode and we will give you all of the details.
Well, Cynthia and Shiver Seeking Friends, I want to start this episode by talking about what a great summer episode lineup we have. We had the unexplained deaths of Ryan Singleton and Jessica Johnson, as well as the disappearances of Robin Gardner and Amy Robechtel. I mean, genuinely baffling cases and so much to kind of explore and wrap our heads around this summer.
We definitely covered some really compelling cases over the last few months and a lot of hot topic cases there too. A lot of them that have a lot of controversy around them.
That's kind of what I was thinking. We didn't design it like that, but we kind of plan our episodes a few weeks out and we try to not overlap too much in the types of cases we have, but we've just kind of independently selected some heavy hitters and a lot that we've been able to uncover new information about, which is, I don't know, it brings a element of kind of excitement to the podcast, I think.
Oh, I totally agree. Anytime we can bring something never before heard, I feel like we're actually accomplishing something. Bringing something fresh eyes that hopefully can help find some answers.
Well, today's case is going to be another biggie, possibly one of the biggest modern day mysterious deaths that we've covered in a while. Kendrick Johnson.
So you know how I feel about this case. This is one that I listened to early on, like back when it first broke. And then I've kind of stayed away from it for a while. And I'm just really curious to see what you're going to bring to us. Because, again, nothing's really in the forefront of my memory on this case, but I know it's got a lot of components.
Well, and one of the reasons you kind of handed the torch over to me in this case is because there are some kind of disturbing elements in the case as well.
Yeah, this one, as a mother of boys, just the idea that this family lost their son, no matter how it happened, it's rough.
Well, in the media, it really gets tossed around a lot because the Johnson family has been very open with sharing autopsy photos and sharing really intimate pictures and moments that stick with us as people, as mothers, and it's hard to look past all of that. Some of those images have really pulled people into this case.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to talk about the one photo that has circulated online that I did see, and I think that's part of what kind of bothered me. I was bothered by looking at these images.
Yeah, and really, this is a very unusual case. Many elements of it point towards an accidental death, but there are random things that just don't line up that way. Unanswered details that mean you can't kind of wrap this up with a bow and say for sure this is what happened to him. And if he was indeed murdered, this would truly be one of the biggest crime cover-ups we have ever covered. So I'm going to get into it. There are a lot of details about this case, and I'm not going to get to all of them, but I'll give the ones that I think are most relevant into deciding which way you kind of lean in this case.
Okay, and I can tell you, even though I am, superficially familiar with this case, I genuinely have no idea where I stand. I do not know if I think he was murdered or if I think it was an accident.
Well, let's get into it and see, because this is a very polarizing case. There are people that think he was 1000% involved in some kind of homicide, and there are people that think he was 1000% involved in a freak accident. And there seem to be very few people in the middle. I'd like for us to be there and just kind of follow the evidence and see where it takes us.
Okay.
On January 10th, 2013, Kendrick's parents became concerned when Kendrick, who frequently went by the name KJ, so that's what I'll call him in this episode, didn't call them to pick him up after a high school football game. KJ had left home that morning and gone to school like normal, but when he didn't call, his mother, Jacqueline, or Jackie Johnson, immediately knew something was wrong. KJ was known to be very responsible, and even if his plans had changed, he would have let his family know. Jackie called the police department that evening to report him missing. The police department was reluctant to take the call at first, but finally took the report, and the Johnsons were told they would look into the case. Unfortunately, Jackie and her husband Kenneth would have to wait all night without any news from Kendrick.
My goodness. Well, first of all, why was the police reluctant to take a report of a missing teenager?
Well, he's 17 years old, and he had only been missing, quote, missing a few hours at that point.
Okay. Well, when your kid's missing for a few hours, like, it's a big deal.
Eventually, they did do the right thing, and I will say, even though they didn't get any word of any kind of investigation, first thing in the morning, they did have a responding police officer at the high school questioning people about his whereabouts.
Okay.
So they did, in my opinion, get to it as quickly as would be reasonable.
Okay. But how awful, though, that they had to wait all night.
And yeah,
ugh.
unfortunately, I think this is just the way that it is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think this is just a reality.
Yeah.
But they did take it, and they did seem to be responsive. They were
Good.
there the first thing in the morning, talking to students, talking to teachers, trying to see if Kendrick had showed up at school.
Okay, good.
The next morning, Jackie would also be at Lowndes High School because she was a school bus driver. Now, little did she know that morning, 2 female students at the school playing around in one of the school's 2 gyms saw what they thought was someone playing a prank on them. They saw what appeared to be socks sticking out of a rolled-up wrestling mat. And when they tugged on the socks, they realized they were still attached to feet, which were attached to a body. At 10 a.m., police notified Kendrick's mother that KJ had been found rolled up inside a wrestling mat in the old gym at Lowndes High School, and he was deceased. How he ended up inside that rolled-up wrestling mat has been a subject of debate for over 10 years. 17-year-old KJ was described as an all-around good kid. He was sweet, quiet, and enjoyed school, especially math and science. KJ was an honor roll student and excelled in sports, especially football, and he aspired to become a professional football player. And let me set the stage for the school. It had 2 gyms, as I said, and they were labeled the new gym and the old gym.
Oh, original.
Some really creative
Yeah.
naming going on here. And in the corner of this gym were some rolled up wrestling mats, like very heavy mats. When rolled up, they were 6 foot tall and 3 foot across. And we're talking solid foam. So these things were pretty darn heavy and pretty sturdy, but there were a collection of them in the corner of the gym. And there's been some speculation as to why there were so many of them in that corner. It is believed that, again, this is January 10th, that the school may have had some resurfacing done on the gym floor over the Christmas holiday when there were no students there. And so all these mats had been moved into the corner, which seems to make sense to me.
It does. Okay, and so I did not go to a public school, so I wouldn't know. Is this unusual for them to be rolled up and in the corner of the gym? Like, would they normally be stored somewhere else?
Not really. I think just because of the nature of the case,
Okay.
everything is circumspect. Everything is kind of being examined. This is not unusual, but what was unusual is that there were so many of them. Apparently, there were always a few kind of stored in the corner, and there were a few being in use.
Okay.
So that's the difference.
Okay.
Because what we find out happens later, it's really exacerbated by the fact that there were so many of them.
Okay.
So that's kind of the idea, is it wouldn't be unusual to have them rolled up in the corner, but there wouldn't normally be as many of them.
Gotcha.
KJ's body was found in one of the mats that was all the way up against the wall. So there were several layers of mats that he would have had to go through in order to get to that mat all the way at the end of the wall. He was face down with one arm extended in front of him, like he was reaching for something. And then one arm kind of over his face, like his elbow was over his chest, and his hand was over his face. And located on the floor underneath where this rolled up mat would have been was a pool of blood and vomit and a single sneaker. Investigators were baffled by what they found, so they started gathering information from other students. And what they realized was this school had a gym locker fee. And this is something that's unusual to me. I didn't have it at my school. I didn't go to a particularly wealthy public school, but I don't know, maybe this is something new. Lowndes High School is an enormous high school. It has 3,000 kids. So maybe they simply just don't have the resources to offer lockers to everyone. But at this school, they had a gym locker fee. And in order to avoid paying the fees, sometimes students would hide their gym gear around the gym. And one of these popular hiding spots was under these wrestling mats. One student who did this frequently said he would just kind of tilt them out over slightly and grab his shoes from under the bottom. So they would throw them in the top, but then in order to retrieve them, they would just kind of tilt them over. Unfortunately, because of the placement of the mat that we know Kendrick was found in, this would not have been possible because he couldn't have reached the bottom of the mat. So investigators started kind of following this theory. Interestingly, there were 2 pairs of shoes in the situation. And this is one of the odd things that there are several odd things. I'll point out this one for sure. There were 2 sets of sneakers found around that gym. The first one was, as I said, the shoe that was found at the bottom of that mat. And that was a black and white Adidas shoe. It was definitely confirmed to be Kendrick's. As a matter of fact, they were a gift from his 8th grade football coach. And there was some blood. There is a picture of this shoe that you can find online. And it was found in that puddle of blood that was at the bottom of the mat. Interestingly, though, the shoe itself doesn't seem to have a lot of blood on it. I'm not really exactly sure what that is. A lot of people that think maybe evidence was planted or evidence was moved think that the shoe should have more blood on it. But not knowing where the shoe was, not knowing how much blood was on the floor, maybe it just simply wasn't close enough to that blood to get more blood stain on it.
And I'm assuming, without being graphic, the origin of the blood is coming like from his facial orifices.
Correct. So
being upside down.
Exactly. Not to get too far ahead, but it's what would be referred to as postmortem purge.
Okay.
So it's just kind of the breakdown of his organs and the natural draining of the blood from being upside down like that. So yes, indeed. That's what it would have been from.
Happening, I can see why it maybe should have been on the shoe. If the shoe was underneath him, I can see.
Correct. So there are some that just aren't sure exactly the circumstances by which the shoe came to not be covered in more blood. Oddly, the pair, like the partner for this particular black and white Adidas shoe, the other shoe was found on the other side of the mats. Not anywhere near where Kendrick was. Almost like the opposite side, like the opposite corner of where the mats were. And this is strange to me. This is weird. The only thing that I can think is somehow he was able to get to one shoe and tossed it out or something. I don't know. But it's weird that one shoe would be on the outside, but one shoe found way in this rolled up tunnel 6 foot down.
So that was my thought. So the theory is he's going into the mats to retrieve his shoes, which he's hidden there. So, but the way you've described his arms as being positioned, I would have a hard time seeing how he would have thrown the first shoe out.
Me too. Is honestly, and again, we'll go into more of it, but I think it would have been pretty much impossible for him to throw it out if he was in the tube. Now, maybe he had tossed the shoes up and one was sitting up on top. Maybe it got stuck halfway down and he was able to grab it. The opening in the middle of that rolled up mat was only about 14 inches. I know, like the claustrophobia in me is hot right now, but 14 inches. So, imagine he's got pretty sizable feet. So I don't know, maybe the shoe, you know what I'm saying? Maybe the shoe wasn't all the way at the bottom.
Sure.
But he was all the way at the bottom.
Down there.
But then how did it come to be that one of his shoes was not also in the tube? So that's strange to me.
That's strange.
Also, there's a second set of sneakers at the scene. And when I say at the scene, I mean in the tube with Kendrick, and they are on top of him. If you're looking down the tube, you can see Kendrick's white socks. You can see his feet have the white socks. And then there's there's two Nike sneakers. They're black and white Nike sneakers with orange laces, and they are in the tube with him. As in, they're on top of him, but they're kind of like wedged by his legs, which is also very unusual.
It is, unless, and we may be getting ahead here, but maybe after he made it into the tube, another student threw their shoes in, not realizing there was a person in there.
That is possible. The other thing that I was thinking is, even though no one has ever said those were Kendrick's shoes, so supposedly the owner of those shoes has not been identified, even though no one has said specifically that they weren't Kendrick's. So what if he went in with those shoes? Maybe he was planning on changing out of those shoes, and just in his struggle to get out of the tube, they were kicked off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because maybe they weren't like the gym shoes he was gonna
Exactly.
wear.
Those were like his street shoes, even though they were Nike sneakers. But does that make sense?
It does. I see what you're saying.
That's the only thing that I can describe outside of, again, somebody else throwing sneakers on top of him. However, because this mat was where it was, I mean, I can't imagine that would have been like the tube everybody throws their shoes in, even though, again, how did his shoes wind up there? So the only thing I can think is maybe he left his shoes in that particular, I keep calling it a tube, but in the mat, like in the tube within the mat. Maybe he left them even there before Christmas when there weren't more mats surrounding it.
Okay.
And he just decided to go back and get them now, and then realized, oh, shoot, the one they're in is all the way in the back.
A lot of unknowns.
A lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this case so strange.
And I can see how some of those could be perfectly reasonable explanations, and then some of them could be sinister. So,
right.
Yeah.
So you can see how the theory really started to form that KJ had gone in hoping to retrieve that shoe, even though the placement of the sneakers that are at the gym are peculiar to me. But it seemed reasonable to think, even though it would be an incredibly tragic freak accident, that he had crawled along the top of these tubes, thought he could somehow reach the bottom, pull out that sneaker, and then go to gym class.
Well, while you were just describing the scenario, I Googled the photo, and I can absolutely see how if he had climbed in, I don't know how in the world anybody would get out.
No. I mean, the only thing that I can think, and there are some experiments that have been done with these tubes with other 17-year-old athletic men, men, and I'll tell you kind of some of their outcomes and some of their thoughts on it after the fact. But it's possible he just wasn't thinking. Maybe he went in further than he thought he was going to, and then just got stuck.
Maybe it was rolled up tighter. Like if it had moved, maybe it was rolled up tighter than it had been previously. Because who's to say he hadn't done this before? Again, this is if he got in there willingly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, again, to set the scene, I've already told you this is a 6-foot tall mat. The opening in the center is about 14 inches. And KJ, like I said, is a 5'10" athletic guy, like a strong young man. And KJ's shoulders were 16 inches across.
I was going to say, he's not like, he's buff.
Yes.
He's not just like a beanpole.
Okay, and so this part is like where my anxiety is like already going like a little bonkers, because this would truly be a horrible situation, regardless of how we ended up in there. This is a truly horrific situation. I mean, and also just being suspended upside down. The human body is not supposed to be suspended for any length of time. It is not. Our organs, our circulatory system, what is our air breathing system?
Respiratory. Oh, see, I am smart.
Our respiratory system, none of them work correctly when we're hanging upside down. And if this happened, it would have meant naturally all the blood in his body would have rushed to his head. This also would have meant breathing would have become difficult, because essentially all your internal organs on the bottom are now pressing on your diaphragm and against your lungs, making it harder and harder for those lungs to expand. In one podcast I was listening to, it said Kendrick could have even lost consciousness in only 10 minutes because of being suspended upside down, because of the blood flow to his head, and then the inability for his lungs to continue to expand. Especially, remember too, so he's already kind of scrunched in with his shoulder scrunched in, and then he's got that arm stuck in front of him as well, which is compressing his chest even more. When police arrived and started kind of securing the scene, they noticed that there was also a book and a yellow folder that was on the gym floor. These were identified as KJ's. And it's theorized that KJ, while climbing on top of these mats in order to get to the one where his shoes were located, had left his book and folder on top of one of the other mats. And when those mats were being pulled away in order to try to get to his body, those books fell to the floor, and that's where they were eventually located.
Okay.
Also unusual at the scene is that KJ's pants were unbuckled and unbuttoned, and his pockets were slightly pulled out. And I don't have many theories for this. He did have a cell phone in one of his pockets, but the cell phone belonged to another family member, and it wasn't even in service. And as a matter of fact, this family member wasn't even sure how he got the phone. The idea is he had just taken the phone and was maybe listening to music off of like the school's Wi-Fi or something like that. But so it's unlikely he was reaching for the phone to call for help because it didn't have service. The only other thing I can think is, was he possibly in some way trying to remove his clothes to try to make more room?
That was my thought. Like the pockets maybe like in the struggle got pulled out, or trying to remove clothes. The thing that's throwing me off there though is his hands are up near his chest and one's extended above his head.
Right.
So how would he have unbuttoned them? Unless, I don't know, is that the style? Is it the style to walk around with your pants unbuttoned? Like I'm not a cool 17-year-old boy in 2010. So
right. And I wouldn't know the answer to that either. I have seen this issue raised with a question mark next to it, and no one has given a suitable answer, not even if it's for fashion. So
okay.
Is that possible? Sure. But no one has come forward saying that's the answer.
We don't really know, I guess, when he went in, but we're presuming it's before gym class.
He's seen on surveillance camera going in right before his wrestling class.
Okay. And would he have changed into, I'm assuming, different clothes for wrestling class?
I know he was going in for shoes. I don't know about the clothing. Okay. I mean, I would think typically yes. But again, he would have had to have clothes for that, and he didn't have the locker. So I'm not sure where he would have had a change of clothes.
Because I'm just wondering, like, I don't know if he knows he's about to change. And so, like, just on his way to the mats, he's just unbuttoning. And, this is obviously an empty gym, I'm assuming, at the time he goes in.
Right. And it certainly is possible. I know it's not unusual for young men to sometimes wear athletic shorts under their jeans.
Correct.
So that's a good possibility as well. Maybe he just figured, I'll just slip off these pants before I put the shoes on.
Yeah.
Because my athletic shorts are already underneath my pants. That certainly would make sense because he was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. Mm-hmm. We don't know what he was wearing underneath, and there's a reason for that. We'll get to that eventually. But when he was found, the pants were unzipped. So maybe, again, and he was hurrying when he's seen on that surveillance. He was seen kind of walking very quickly towards the mats because he didn't want to be late for wrestling. So it's possible that he was trying to kind of kill two birds with one stone, if you will.
Yeah, it's still bizarre, but I'm just trying to figure out any reason why his pants would have been undone.
Heck, maybe he was even trying to store his pants there.
Yeah.
He was just going to grab the shoes and then...
I think I would have taken them off before I got into the tube, but...
Maybe. I don't know. It's weird, right?
It's weird, yeah.
Now, KJ's body was taken to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, or GBI, which is the Georgia version of the FBI. Very respected organization. And they determined that the cause of death was due to positional asphyxia, meaning the position of KJ's body prevented him from breathing.
I really hope that podcast was right and he was unconscious within 10 minutes, because this would just be hell. Quite frankly.
Even 10 minutes is too long.
No, this would be this is awful.
Really, really terrible. I agree. Additional searches of the area did reveal in the back corner of a gym a few streaks of blood, is all I can describe them as. They almost look like drops that ran, if you will.
Okay.
And no testing was done of this blood, however, and it was determined that it would not be cost or time effective. And I do want to explain this a little bit because I kind of made the face that you're making right now. Like, are you kidding me?
Right.
I
We've got
mean,
a dead teenager here. What do
yeah.
you mean it's not cost effective?
What do you mean it's not cost
Yeah.
effective? Exactly. But the fact of the matter is, they were not able to determine the age of that blood. And based on the photo that I saw, it does look old. It's not fresh blood. And again, as I've explained, Lowndes High School had 3,000 students. Any one of them could have come in and out of that gym. There's also events taking place there. So there's visiting teams, there's parents, there's the cheer team. Any one of them could have been in there and could have left that blood. Maybe somebody had an injury, maybe someone had a nosebleed. And even if they only wanted to test the kids at the school, they would have needed permission. Again, they're all minors. So now
Mhm.
they're going to get permission slips. So just because you test blood, you have to have something to test it back to.
I think they could have, and again, this is without getting into the nitty gritty of it, but could they not have at least tested it against Kendrick or KJ
Sure.
and just found out if it was his?
Sure, they could have. Unfortunately, they just didn't think that would yield them any answers, so that was not done. Police also found some bloody tissues in the girls' restroom, but they were able to track down a student who said she had a nosebleed, and those were her tissues, so she was cleared. So as police were busy wrapping things up, the Johnson family was, well, heating up. They did not, and to this day do not, believe that KJ's death was an accident. 0% they believe this could have happened in an accidental way. Only 3 days after KJ was found, family members started speaking to the press, saying they believe the investigation was not being handled correctly because KJ was Black. And I'll get to that a little bit more further, but they really felt in their hearts that there is no way that this could have been accidental. This, to me, shows an absolute lack of faith in police work.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I don't trust the evidence that's being presented to me. So I get that. But I do also understand or can empathize, I think. They're in deep grief. And it is a really bizarre way
It
for
is
a child
absolutely
to die. So unless I knew for sure that my son had been throwing his shoes in this mat and this was something he was doing, I think I would be like, there's no way he got in there himself. So I can kind of see from both sides how it seems very, or I can kind of see from their point of view how this would be hard to wrap your mind around.
I absolutely understand that. I think it's so difficult that we still live in this world where there's always suspicion thrown. And I mean, many could argue they're right to have suspicions. They're absolutely right to have suspicions. They are right to worry about racial bias. It's just so difficult to know that we live in a world where there's already distrust from the very beginning. And I think that creates an environment where it's very hard for us to work together. And I feel like that's one of the most polarizing parts of this case.
No, that totally sucks. I cannot imagine being someone who feels like I cannot trust those who are placed there to help me.
Right. One of the first things that the Johnson family pointed out as no way could this have been an accidental death was that KJ was in a gym that was being used by students that day.
So I was going to ask, this was the old gym, so was the old gym used?
It was. As a matter of fact, while KJ was in the rolled up mat, there were classes happening. Their argument is that the students and teachers in the gym would have heard KJ's screams and would have come to his aid. And there definitely are on surveillance several classes that pass through in the afternoon. However, those classes are doing everything that classes in a gym do. There's shouting, there's screaming, there's bouncing balls, there's squeaking shoes, there's activity in there. You know how echoey a gym is.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. A gym is not a quiet place. Not to mention, any sound he is making is being completely muffled by thick, I mean, feet of thick, 4 feet of thick rubber. What is it? Rubber?
Yeah,
Something like that.
it's several different layers of material. It's like foam and rubber, but yes, these very heavy insulated
Right.
mats.
I mean, as podcasters, we know all about sound and drowning it out and making it not sound like we're in tunnels. And they've got feet of that around him.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, there were some, again, surveillance cameras, which become a big part of this case as well, but none of them pointed to the mats.
Okay, of course not. Of course not.
Yes,
That's why we're
unfortunately.
talking about this case.
Exactly. I also want to go back to the point where he could have lost consciousness in as little as 10 minutes. So, how many minutes would he have even had to scream before he may have lost the ability to do so? And even then, as you said, he's in a very thick mat with limited lung capacity.
Yeah. And I get there's a lot of classes, but obviously it seems to me that there's at least some downtime. Otherwise, he wouldn't have even had a chance to hide the shoes and go into the mat to get the shoes, if that's again what happened. So there has to be some quiet time in this gym.
Well, there's a YouTube channel called Ashes to Ash, and they performed an experiment where they retrieved one of these wrestling mats and they rolled it to the exact dimensions as the one that Kendrick was found in. I found this to be absolutely fascinating. So the conductor of this experiment had a talent agency find her 2 athletic 17-year-old men with shoulder widths approximately 16 inches, that of Kendrick. And she had requested that the talent agency not tell them what they were coming in for. So they had no way to read up on the case or even figure out what they were walking into. So they couldn't form any bias over whether this could have been an accident or whether this would have had to be a homicide, the fact that he was found in the mat. What came out of that experiment is fascinating to me. In the first experiment, she had the mat standing vertically, the 6-foot tall mat, and she had the young men climb up on a ladder and look down in the hole. The first young man that she had looked down and said, yeah, it's maybe a little intimidating, but I think I can totally get a shoe and climb back out. And he said he probably would try it. He said he felt athletic enough. He felt strong enough. He felt that he could muscle his way in and muscle his way out. The second young man was much more reserved and said, no, that does not look like something I would do. My checks and balances are going off and I don't feel like this would be a safe endeavor. So here we have 2 teenagers, 2 17-year-olds, and one of them said, yeah, I think I can do it. I mean, I think it's just that idea of being bulletproof when you're that age.
Sure.
And feeling like I'm athletic enough. I'm a strong dude. I should be able to do this.
Nothing will ever happen to me.
Nothing will ever happen to me. Exactly. So when you say who would choose to go in there, I mean, I certainly wouldn't choose to go in there and get stuck, but maybe he felt like he could have gotten in and gotten out. In the second experiment, she laid the tubes on their sides and asked the young men to scoot through the tubes. One of the first young man, the one that felt confident and be able to getting in and out of the tube, his shoulders measured 16 and a half inches. The second young man, his shoulders measured 17 inches. Both of them were able to shimmy all the way through the tube. Now, again, it's not vertical.
Which would be a lot more difficult.
It's horizontal, but because of some of the foam on the inside of that inner tube, as I'm calling it, they were able to, with a good deal of effort, motor their way through to the other end.
But again, being vertical, to get out of it, they would have to be fighting gravity while also fighting the compression of the tube. So much more difficult.
Well, the most dramatic part came in the third experiment.
Oh, okay.
She asked the young men to crawl in the tube to the end of the tube. So they're kind of at the end, kind of right about where Kendrick would have been, where he was found. So their head is, only a few inches from the side with their arms inside. And the experimenter and her assistant lifted the tubes vertically So the men were hanging upside down. Now, they only did this for a period of 10 or 15 seconds. And what they asked the young men to do was to scream in the inside of the mats and to try to tip over the mats, because that was an idea as well. Now, theirs was a single mat with nothing around it. KJ was in a mat with lots of mats packing him in. I mean, one side was a wall and the rest was surrounded by mats. They just said, hey, see if you can knock over the mat. You're an athletic boy. See what you can do. It was almost impossible to hear them scream.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of them could knock over the mat. Now, those mats were laid back down, and both of them had, I'm not going to say a look of terror on their faces, but there was definitely a look of, I would be in over my head. Remember the first young man that was so confident that I believe I can go in? He was humbled.
Sure.
He was absolutely humbled. Even after that 10 to 15 seconds, he was sweating. He was hot. He said it was hard for me to catch my breath because you're upside down. You don't take all of that into consideration. And even the second young man said the same thing. He said, I don't ever want to experience that again.
He didn't want to experience it the first time, poor guy.
No, and that's kind of what the experimenter asked him. She said, are you still pleased with your answer? And he said, oh yeah, I knew better than that. But I will say, it was interesting to see the second young man, how he handled the experiment, but watching the first one, who went into it so confident, to come out the other side saying, that's not gonna work. He said, I couldn't move. He said, I could barely move my legs. But you do think there is this confidence of youth that may have just led KJ down a path that he couldn't come back from, possibly. I don't know. I hate to think that's what happened, because this is absolutely horrendous, but it was very interesting to see this experiment done with a mat exactly like the one that Kendrick was in. Even if he was yelling, you would not have heard him, and he would not have been able to squeeze out of that mat or knock the mat over. That is confirmed.
So that tells us, at the very least, it absolutely could have been an accident.
It's very possible. Now, the argument could have still been, what if someone had in some way incapacitated him and put him in the mat?
Here's my, and I know you have a lot more to say, but here's my thought with that. This is the mat in the very back against the wall. If I wanted to put somebody in a mat, are they having to move the other mats and then lay it flat and roll him up in it? Or are we somehow getting enough people together that we're able to lift him up and push him down into the, you know what I mean? Like the logistics of somebody else getting him in the mat are honestly just as like flabbergasting to me as the idea of him getting himself in. Like it's just as strange.
I would agree. And there have certainly been some theories as to what may have happened for him to end up in that situation if there was foul play involved. But there have never been any specifics outside of saying whoever did this to him rolled him up in a mat. But to say that they would have moved all the other mats around him, I mean, that must have taken quite a while to do. I can't imagine that would have been a quick process.
Well, and again, I don't know how much any one of these mats weighs, but they weigh enough that a full-grown man can't knock it over from the inside.
Right.
Yeah, I wonder how physically, possible it is for someone to get this other full-grown man wrapped up in this mat.
I don't disagree with you. I think this would certainly be an argument towards it being an accident. It's just, how practical is it that someone could have killed him and put him in this mat in this position?
Right. I mean, I think if I were to do that, I would at least pick a mat that I only had to move the one.
Yeah, certainly. Now, there has been a long-running rumor, basically from the very beginning, that the Johnson family, Kenneth and Jackie, were not able to view KJ's body after he was found deceased. And this certainly would perpetuate the idea that there was some kind of cover-up or something like that. However, we do know that they were able to see his body just 2 days after he was deceased. Of course, they weren't able to see his body while it was actually being autopsied, but there is nothing to show that it was in any way purposely withheld or that any of their requests to see him were not met. And I think that's an important thing to note here, because that's something that you will see repeated quite a few times, is that they weren't able to see their son's body, and that just isn't the case.
Where did that rumor start, or do we know?
I don't really know.
Okay.
I don't really know, but it has been perpetuated. What the family does say is that the state of Kendrick's body, specifically his face, was too swollen and bruised to have simply been a result of an accidental death. And I think this is a very difficult topic to speak about, especially to a family. But the fact is, the body was left suspended for quite a long time. And there are natural processes that happen during that time. Even people that, die hanging in the opposite direction, their extremities get very swollen, very bloated. We are not a community, a civilization that has a lot of experience seeing corpses and seeing death. And I mean, I'm grateful for that. Unfortunately, though, it does leave a lot of interpretation open when it comes to laymen trying to determine cause of death. And I fully understand seeing your son's face discolored and bruised with signs of lividity. I see that being interpreted as being, a sign of a violent death.
Well, I as we talked about in the top of the episode, I have seen this photo that, is circulated online of Kendrick, a close up of his face.
Yes.
And it's hard for me to look at. And I know what I'm looking at, but it's hard for me to look at because he does look so, honestly, he's unrecognizable. If you told me it was the same boy, I wouldn't believe you, because if I didn't know it was the same person in both photos.
Unrecognizable.
Literally unrecognizable. But again, yeah, we do know that, the effects that his body position would play on him.
Well, and there has been a little controversy about the photo that you're speaking about specifically, because the Johnson family has said, certainly right after his death, that he didn't look like himself. He didn't resemble himself. It certainly looked like the death was due to some kind of head trauma based on the way that his face and his head looked. There is a very popular photo, the one that you're referring to, which has become, honestly, I am shocked with the way this photo has been used. It has been put on t-shirts. It has been put on signs. It is prevalent at all of the protests for justice for KJ. I can't imagine being a parent and seeing this photo. However, his parents really do believe that this is kind of the rally cry for their son. And it has incited a lot of people to join this search for justice for KJ because it's a horrendous photo. Now, it's come out in 2015, though, 2 years after the photo started being used in these protests, that this photo is not only post-death, but it is post-autopsy. This was a photo that was taken at KJ's funeral. And autopsies are not kind to a body. I don't know how else to really say this, but there is a lot of manipulation of the skin, the muscles, tissues, bones, and even the skin of the face is removed to see if there are any bruises, any damage to the muscles, any hemorrhage of the brain. And so this photo was taken even post-autopsy. So this is not how he looked directly after death. However, if you listen to quotes from the family, you would think that it is. Even Jackie Johnson, one of the quotes that I've seen several times, said, "My son went into school looking perfect and came out looking like this." However, that's not really an accurate depiction. I understand what she's saying, and I imagine seeing him post-death was absolutely horrendous, traumatic, and I understand why they would think something else had happened to their son. But to use this photo, I think, is a little misrepresentative.
Yeah, you have to be, you have to take everything into account. And the fact that, like you said, first of all, the way he died, and then the fact that, this is post autopsy. To me, that explains everything that you see in that photo. Is it still hard to look at and would be difficult for a mother to accept? Of course. But it does explain what we're seeing there.
Right.
I think. I'm not an expert, but to me, it explains what we're seeing.
Right. I think for the most part, we are. Now, I don't know. I'm not in any way an autopsy expert. I'm not a coroner. However, the coroner did not find any other trauma to the head when examined. No trauma to the head, no trauma to the neck, only asphyxia. So I'm going on that. And again, attributing any kind of additional damage or anything that looks like damage to just being lividity. That's all I can go on based on the information that I have in front of me. Now, on May 2nd, KJ's death was officially ruled an accident. This did not go over well to those that think that KJ was murdered. The Johnson family and a large portion of the Black community said, no, you did not do a thorough job. This is not the correct thing. And I get it. After looking at him and seeing his face, they said there's no way. And again, what a freak accident. I think this is hard to believe that this happened to him either way.
It is almost, in some ways, I think it's harder to think that it was an accident.
At this point, the Johnsons really felt like this was a massive cover-up because they had gone through so many agencies and each one was telling them that it was an accident. So they felt like it started from students at the school all the way to the school, to the Valdosta Police Department, to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Anybody that was really involved in this case, they felt was involved in some kind of cover-up because in their opinion, what they were seeing is their son who had been violently assaulted. And they felt anybody else that couldn't see that must be part of this cover-up to deny what they felt they were seeing with their own eyes.
Well, and when you take into account that historically minorities have been treated unfairly.
Sure.
Many, many times, over and over again.
Sure.
And you add that to it, I get it.
I do too. I do too. And I feel like that's the undercurrent, the very sad undercurrent of this case, the mistrust in law enforcement that, may be accurate. I don't know, but it's very difficult to know that we live in a world where this still exists, where they have to be suspicious, where they have to feel like they're looking out for their own.
I'm with you.
Now, the police department certainly did not make their job any easier because many inconsistencies and possibly big mistakes came to light.
Okay, well then hold on now.
Uh-huh.
I've been assuming everything's been done right in this case. Hold on. There may be even more reason to be questioning what they're saying.
Now, first, there turned out to be some kind of almost turf war between Bill Watson, the coroner, and the police department when it came to the actual crime scene. According to the coroner, he was not notified in a timely manner and was not able to view the body as he should have been able to. According to the police department, the body had not been moved after it was found, and all they were doing was securing the crime scene. But the coroner disagreed. In a report dated January 22nd, obtained by CNN, he wrote, quote, "I was not notified of this death until 15:45 hours. The investigative climate was very poor to worse when I arrived at the scene. The body had been noticeably moved. The scene had been compromised, and there was no cooperation from law enforcement at the scene. Furthermore, the integrity of the evidence bag was compromised on January 13th, 2013, by opening the sealed bag and exhibiting the dead body to his father. I do not approve of the manner this case has handled. Not only was the scene compromised, the body was moved. The integrity was breached by opening the sealed body bag. Information necessary for my lawful investigation was withheld."
Okay, so honestly, for me, this kind of changes everything because once you start poorly handling a crime scene and messing with the evidence. It's really hard to say what happened in this scenario.
And there's been no real answer to this, why this happened. The police department still claims over and over, we handled it the same way we handle every single case. This was not in any way a case we took lightly. We were covering all of our bases, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and there were mountains of interviews, eyewitness statements that they took, and they believe that calling the coroner late wasn't something to be worried about. The coroner strongly disagrees here. Honestly, I don't really know what be procedure. I mean, I think calling the coroner earlier rather than later would have certainly been better. I don't know. I don't understand the delay in calling.
Well, here's my thing. I don't know what the procedure is, and I'm not a police investigator and I'm not a coroner. But the coroner is saying
Yeah.
that the delay affected his findings.
I'm with you.
So if he or she, but it's a he in this scenario,
Yes.
is saying this affects what I'm able to do, then I'm inclined to believe that.
Right. Right. And I again, I don't know who is right in the situation, but clearly the coroner thinks the police department is in the wrong. And I think we need to pay attention to that. He's feeling like he couldn't properly examine the body. And there has been this question of how was the body moved before his arrival? As far as the body was moved, there haven't been any clear details as to how the body might have been affected by that. As in, was the body moved, meaning like laying the mat on its side? Does that mean the body was moved?
Because it was laid on its side.
It was laid on its
in the
side.
photo I saw.
Sure, exactly. So was that what he means by having the body moved? And maybe that did affect his findings. Maybe that meant bodily fluids moved. Maybe, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
So I don't know what effect that would have had on the findings.
What's interesting to me is I would honestly have imagined that the body would have been moved even more than that, because I think if I found a person wrapped up in this, I would try to get them out unless I knew for sure that they were deceased, which if it's only feet, I don't know. I don't know if they were able to tell how close these students were able to get, you know what I mean?
Well, and we know for sure those girls playing on top of the mats pulled on his legs.
Right. So maybe the fact he didn't move or didn't answer, or maybe they could touch him and tell. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I do know once they laid the mat down, like once they freed the mat from the collection of mats and laid it down, there was a smell. I mean, do
we know how long he was there?
Let me do the math in my head now, about 18 hours.
Okay.
In response to this coroner's pretty damning report, the police department said, again, this is how they treat every case, but it does make you wonder, were they trying to hide something? Were they trying to cover something up? It just leaves them very exposed.
It's not a good look.
It's not a good look. I totally agree with that. And again, adding more fuel to this idea that maybe there's some nonsense going on.
I have to say, so far, I can't rule it out just as a listener.
Well, listen to this. KJ's clothing that he was found with went missing. Like, no one knows where these clothes have gone. According to an inventory report, the clothes were included with KJ in the body bag. That body bag went to the GBI, and then from the GBI to the funeral home. Somewhere along those stops, the clothes disappeared. The funeral home said they never appeared there. The police department and the GBI claim that the clothing was in the body bag.
Like he was wearing it, right? They wouldn't have undressed him in the middle of the gym.
They did.
So, he was undressed in the gym?
He was undressed in the gym. The coroner undressed him to examine the body.
In the gym. Okay.
In the gym. So all the clothing was put in a bag with him.
Okay.
With KJ.
Okay. I don't know. It's starting to feel a little more like a cover-up to me. Everybody says, oh, we sent it. And the funeral home has no reason to lie about that unless they just lost it. But
Well, and again, so I think this could point to two different things. One, it's a cover up, and there was something on that clothing that implicated someone that, nobody wanted to get out. The other thing is somebody just made a mistake and accidentally tossed them in the wrong evidence bin. Somebody accidentally incinerated them. Somebody forgot to sign it in somewhere. What I do find peculiar is that no one has come forward, even with how high profile this case is, and said, I just made a mistake.
well, here's the thing. I think you and I would come forward and be like, I made a mistake. But do you think everybody would come, especially on a high profile case like this, come forward and be like, hey, it was me, so the whole
Right.
world can hate them?
So again, it's a bad look.
It's bad.
Could it be chalked up to an accident? Sure. But does it look like somebody's trying to cover up? Yeah, possible.
Yeah. And I'm with you. It probably was an accident. It probably was a mistake. We're human. I lost 3 pages of script yesterday. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when you put it all together.
I agree. In April of 2013, Kenneth and Jackie Johnson, as well as 5 other family members, were arrested for blocking access to the main entrance to the Lowndes County Judicial Center and blocking access to the Judicial Wing hallway. After approximately an hour of deliberation, they were convicted of interfering with government property, and they received a 12-month in-jail suspended sentence. The protest was designed to push authorities to speed up the release of information concerning the death of KJ. Assistant Solicitor General Matthew Brown prosecuted the case and told the jury in his closing remarks that he believed the defendants crossed the line during their protest when they prevented citizens from entering a judicial complex. He said, quote, "That's not civil disobedience. That's breaking the law." The Johnsons' pastor, Reverend Rose, offered up his house as collateral for the Johnsons' bail, showing his support of the Johnsons' search for answers. And upon Jackie's release, she said, quote, "I'm going to be right back out at the courthouse in the morning, ready to do it all over again until we get justice." And they did just that. Protest for justice for KJ lasted for 10 months.
Oh, my goodness.
10 months.
On top of just everything, losing their son, everything, the desperation they must have felt, whether they're right or wrong.
Exactly.
They were desperate.
10 months of protest gathered a lot of attention, including that of Reverend Al Sharpton, the political activist. Reverend Rose, who has been very supportive of the Johnsons, even opened his home and his church to a rally to help raise money in support of the Johnsons. Al Sharpton gave $500 of his own money towards what he suggested should become a reward fund for information. And because of this, more donations started coming in, and they managed to accrue about $8,000 to help in the search for justice for KJ. In addition, a businessman named Roy Taylor put what at the time was an anonymous reward fund of $10,000 towards information pertaining to the arrest of KJ's possible killer. Now, this money was only available for 90 days. I mean, and I understand that. There are often limitations on how long rewards funds are put out. However, this didn't really go over very well with the Johnsons when that money was rescinded. And again, at this point, this was an anonymous donation that was put up for their son, but they felt that it was unfair that this money was rescinded. So, unfortunately, someone in the Johnson camp, I don't know if they were necessarily related to the Johnsons, started saying that this businessman, Roy Taylor, must now be in some kind of relationship with someone related to the FBI. And that's why he has now rescinded the reward fund of the $10,000.
So they definitely have what I would call blinders on when it comes to any other possibility other than their son was murdered and everybody covered it up.
In addition, there's a slight bit of controversy involving that $8,000 that was also earned because the family has never set up their own reward fund. Now, certainly, those donations were not specifically slated for a reward fund. It was Reverend Al Sharpton's suggestion that it become one, or at least a portion of it be put towards one. However, I'm sure at this point the family has a lot of legal fees and other things, the billboards, the shirts, those kinds of things. And so maybe they felt that that money was best served in those other places. So I'm not saying in any way they were flippant or they weren't good stewards of that money. But I do think the majority of people had given it to be part of a reward fund. And so there was a little bit of backlash when that didn't come to fruition.
Okay.
And more than anything, it just kind of muddies the waters a little bit more because then you start wondering, what are the motivations of some of these people involved? As a matter of fact, even Reverend Rose, who again really believed in the Johnsons and put his house up as collateral, remember when they were arrested, kind of pulled back from the situation a little bit because he was not feeling great about it. On October 31st, 2013, after a lot of this concern about money and just this controversy, he came out in a pretty damning interview himself. He said in an interview with Black Crow Media, quote, "It is our candid opinion, based on all that we have seen, the official stance is that this is a tragic accident, and Kendrick Johnson was not murdered. They had to have conspired to cover up a murder that nobody has yet proven existed, which means all of these people would risk their jobs, their reputations, their retirement, and risk going to prison. Here's what's important to me as a man. I am convinced that God wants me to look for the truth wherever the truth leads. And truth has neither color nor creed. It knows neither race nor religion. The truth is the truth. In the end, I would rather be with the truth than not be with the truth, whatever that costs me now."
It's pretty powerful words.
Pretty powerful words. And again, not saying for sure that it was an accident, but, it shows kind of a shifting movement.
Well, what he says, I feel, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, should be the attitude in every single death investigation. We're looking for the truth, whatever that may be, whatever your age, whatever your gender, whatever your race, whatever your marital status, none of that matters. We're looking for the truth, whatever that is. And if they've looked for the truth and this is where they land. Now, again, I'm still put off by the fact that the coroner had some things to say about this investigation. But if all the evidence points to an accident, then I think we have to accept it was an accident.
In June of 2013, based on a lot of public pressure, a second autopsy was performed on KJ's body. His body was exhumed and examined by an autopsy technician appointed by the Johnsons. In the second autopsy, the first shocking revelation was that Kendrick's head and body had been stuffed with old newspaper.
I've heard of this before. Now, was it just this case I've heard of this, or is that kind of what they do?
This has been kind of a thing.
Yeah.
We're finding this happens a lot. Now, this was Harrington Funeral Home that performed the funeral. And when asked about it, they said it is not atypical and often common for bodies to be stuffed with sawdust or cotton. Now, okay, that's great, but also he wasn't stuffed with sawdust or cotton.
He was stuffed with
newspaper. Also, his internal organs were missing. They were not with the body. Apparently, they had been disposed of by the autopsy tech originally because he said they were too decomposed to be sent with the body. If the body's going to be buried anyway, what does it matter? Why wouldn't you just send the organs? So I do think that was strange. So in this autopsy, not only was the body stuffed with newspaper that they weren't expecting, but there were no internal organs with the body. So there was nothing to be examined.
Which is a problem because none of this, I'm assuming, was released to the family. And I don't know to what extent the family's told what somebody has to do. You know what I mean? During this process. So
I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And there was actually a pretty hefty lawsuit brought by the Johnsons against Harrington Funeral Home for doing this to KJ's body. And the lawsuit was thrown out. They found
really?
they found that the funeral home had not done anything unethical, and that using different materials to stuff a body in order to prepare them for a funeral and for their internment is not illegal.
Again, not being an expert on the process, but we've talked about what happens to a body, so I can understand if it needs to have something to help shape it again or things of that nature, that they have to get creative. But I will tell you, man, to hear that happened to your child, it just seems
It's
gross.
shocking.
Yeah.
It was just shocking for them.
Yeah.
In the second autopsy, there was some kind of bruise and hemorrhage found on the anterior of the neck, meaning the front of the neck, that was not revealed in the previous autopsy.
That's interesting. Can bruising like that happen after like death? And I don't know. I don't know how that works.
Well, it's just
Wouldn't think so, because bruising is an accumulation of blood, which is not flowing. So I would think it's either there or it's not.
that's true. However, no bruising was found in the first autopsy. And I guess what I'll say is, okay, so there's a bruise on the side of his neck. Does that mean he died based on a bruise to the side of his neck? There were no broken bones. You know what I'm
Right, the
saying? All bones were still intact. I mean, can you kill somebody with like a bruise to the neck? Like, I don't know. So say he was attacked, and say this bruise was indeed there. Why it wasn't found on the first autopsy, I don't know. Why it was found now, I mean, if it is there, I'm so glad that we found it. Still, even with an injury, and they did find some like superficial cuts on his arms and hands, but again, that could have been from struggling in the mat. But
Those
to
injuries
me,
alone.
that doesn't indicate a mortal wound.
Right, right. Those injuries alone don't seem to be enough to confirm homicide.
Right. So in this second autopsy, in his opinion, death was brought around by a blow to either the neck or the head.
Okay, so in his opinion, then this bruise was enough to have killed him. It sounds like.
Yes, but he also said the neck or the head, yet he didn't notice any injuries to the head, which seems strange to me. Like, what does that mean? And I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe there was some weird chokehold where he was just unconscious when he was in the mat.
Sure. And he still died from, but that wasn't this guy's findings either.
No.
So,
And as a matter of fact, he said he tested the lungs and didn't find any fluid in the lungs, which you would have found if he had been upside down for a long amount of time. But granted, I don't know. He had been buried for 6 months. He was also stuffed with newspaper. Is it possible that you weren't able to test the lungs at that point? Also, did you know lungs aren't considered organs?
when you said that, I was like, why does he have lungs? I thought they didn't take his work.
They were still in. So somehow, I don't know if that's typical. I don't know if they stay in, but apparently lungs are not considered organs because they were still attached to the body.
I mean, this is very interesting. And I can understand how, if a family is already looking for someone to confirm that their child was murdered, and then they have a second autopsy saying, hey, he died from an injury to the neck or head, like, this helps to confirm their concerns. But I just want to know how it got to this point.
The next biggest part in this case is this pretty legendary video surveillance footage, because there were a lot of video cameras. As a matter of fact, on Lowndes High School, there were 6 separate video camera systems, 3 of which captured Kendrick on the day of his death. And I've already mentioned several of them. We have several of them showing him going into the gym, quickly going through to get to those mats, which again, unfortunately, are not on camera, which again, I will say, those that subscribe to the conspiracy theory think that was thought out, that was planned.
I mean, it is convenient, I guess, or inconvenient, whichever way you choose to look at it.
Well, I was going to say, depending on what side of the camp you're on, it's certainly convenient or inconvenient. We also have video of Kendrick out in the hallway. We have videos of him by the lockers. We have videos of him in the hallway leading into the gym. The biggest thing with these videos is because they were all on separate camera systems, these camera systems have their own internal clocks. The time stamps on these cameras are not all correct.
Are they even close? Are we minutes off or are we hours off?
10 minutes, but 10 minutes in a case like this could make a big difference. So there are a lot of things that happen on camera that you have to make assumptions about. And when you're talking about a case as sensitive and as volatile as this, making assumptions is not easy.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
The other complicated part about the videos is the cameras are triggered based on motion. So they come on based on movement and then they go off after the movement ceases. And the way it determines movement is by having so many pixels out of its screen change light, like reflect light. So in the foreground, a lot of light would change. That would sense a lot of motion. And so it would turn on. If something happens in the back, it doesn't notice the movement. And so the camera is not triggered. This video that has come out, number one, the timestamps don't match, which really makes people upset in a situation like this.
This is the video of him walking into the gym?
It's all the video.
Okay.
So it's him walking down the hallway of lockers. It's him going in the hallway before the gym. It's him in the gym.
Okay.
It's kind of his whole
Just
movement.
the whole everything.
Everything.
Because I'm thinking, like, we should be able to see if somebody else went into the gym at the same time or behind him.
And that's true. And there is no one.
Okay.
That's true. But again, what if they were waiting for him by the mats?
Right.
That's the idea.
Oh,
because
they walked in previously.
Exactly. And we'll get into kind of what the Johnson's theory is as to what happened in that gym. But the idea would be whatever happened to him happened off camera and not uncoincidentally.
And we have to take into account that these cameras are not foolproof. There could be something far off in a distance that doesn't activate the camera. Things could be missed.
And when you're watching it, it certainly does look, especially to a layman, especially if you're not used to looking at this video footage, that the videos were edited because it's like a frame every second. So it looks like the frames have been spliced.
Like stop motion.
It's
almost.
stop motion.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's very frustrating because you think, okay, was this a result of how the film was recorded, or was this because of some kind of manipulation of the film? The procurement of the videos have also been a bit of a subject of debate. The Johnson family has said that they were denied access to the video footage. They wanted the raw video footage. Lowndes High School responded by saying, we can't simply give you the footage because there are minors on it. We're not allowed to just give that out. They said, if you get a court order, we will give you the tapes. However, the Johnson family never did that. There are definitely paper trails of them doing Freedom of Information Act requests and things like that, but they never went through the court, which quite frankly, I just don't understand if they were so desperate to get it. Maybe they were given bad advice. I don't know. But to say we weren't given access to it is not correct, because the school, in my opinion, is doing the correct thing by not providing footage that may be used inappropriately.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't want just footage of my child being handed out to just who knows who.
Well, the other sticking point is the school provided copies of the videos to the police department.
They kept
and
the
GBI. They kept the originals. Now, some have said that this is a real problem because, especially when it comes to digital technology, it isn't necessarily what you're seeing on the film, but the metadata, that encrypted data, gives you a lot of information. You're able to go back and look at it and say, so was something added? Was something taken away? Was the file name changed? Was the timestamp changed? And they're not able to see that on a copy.
Oh, well then, I mean, I don't know. That kind of is like a big deal. I have to say, so far, though I do feel like this is leaning towards an accident, I really can see how the Johnson family is questioning everything and then not getting answers that satisfy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think there are some very strange bits and pieces. And this video was reviewed by authorities, and they didn't see anything that changed their opinion on the case. They did indeed acknowledge that these were copies of the videos. The timestamps don't match. The recording was stop motion, as you said. However, they did not believe that the footage had been edited or altered. There were some things, again, the metadata was missing. The resolution wasn't that great because you're talking about a copy of a copy. You know how that goes.
Sure.
But they did not believe that there were any significant issues. Again, the Johnson family has said, you should have let us in right away to view all of the raw footage, not the footage that you agreed to give us, not the ones that you handpick and hand select. We want to see all of it. And I see how they would want that.
I think if it were me and it's my child and it's personal to me, I want every I dotted, every T crossed. I don't want to take somebody else's word for it that, nah, there's nothing here that leads me to believe this was manipulated. No, I want you to look at the metadata and show me where it was not manipulated. I think that's fair. They wouldn't even show them the unedited. I understand not releasing the unedited, video of people's children, but like they couldn't even view it. Because I think that would have been fair.
They said, come to us with a court order.
Okay. So, they could have if they'd gotten the court order. But I feel like again, I don't know all the rules, but I think to allow a family member to view it as opposed to like take it home with them is different.
And maybe that was offered to them. We don't know. I just don't know about that. If you are more interested in learning more about this video surveillance, the Valdosta Daily Times did an incredible in-depth look at every single one of the video processors, the types of video cameras, the types of digital media that each of them put together. And based on different movements of people and students within the videos, they were able to put together a more accurate timeline. And it is incredible the amount of man hours that they put into figuring out where everybody was, where they should be, and again, how each of those internal videos worked. They went down to like naming the types of processors they had and things like that for people that actually know what any of that means. But if you're interested in looking into that, please check them out, the Valdosta Daily Times. They help tremendously in helping, people like me, quite frankly, understanding why those timestamps look the way that they do.
Sure, because without that explanation, it would look suspicious.
Absolutely. Now, the Johnson family always felt like KJ had been murdered, but to them, his murderer or murderers were not faceless or nameless. Jackie Johnson came forward and said, quote, "We know who killed him. We just have to prove it." The two suspects were named Braden and Brian Bell. Now, Brandon and Brian Bell attended school with KJ at Lowndes High School, and they played sports along with him. And in the natural course of things, there were occasional tiffs between high school boys, and there were even a little bit of competition between Brian and KJ, both on the field, and also there was some alleged flirting on KJ's part with Brian's girlfriend. And this put Braden and Brian as key suspects to the Johnson family. They also felt that there was some racial tension, that some of the bullying of KJ was because he was Black. And this plays a role because Braden and Brian were both white. They were also the sons of FBI agent Rick Bell.
So if there is anybody capable of manipulating an investigation, this might be the guy.
Well, I think that's kind of why this whole conspiracy formula has come together, because it was to protect these sons of an FBI agent.
I get it.
The theory is that Braden and Brian lured KJ to the gym through this mutual female friend that they had, that she was kind of bait to get him to the gym, that the two boys then severely beat him, wrapped him up in this mat, and then left him in the gym.
So now we're talking like full-blown, premeditated, first-degree murder.
Right. Unfortunately, a big hole in the story is that both Braden and Brian have Loctite alibis for the time that KJ died. Brian was in a classroom, which is confirmed by video surveillance of him entering the classroom and then eyewitnesses in the classroom itself. Braden was on a bus, not even on campus, leaving to go to a sporting event. So it seems very unlikely that they were the perpetrators. Did they have some kind of beef with KJ? Maybe. No other students have come forward and said they've in any way said anything of any kind of violent nature towards KJ, or even that there was tension with them passing in the halls or anything like that. So none of that has come forward. The Johnsons, though, feel that KJ was treated unfairly by these two boys. And again, based on the magnitude of the cover-up that's happening, they believe that it must be sons of a pretty high-up official, and an FBI agent would kind of fit that role.
And the fact that they have alibis, what does the Johnson family say about that?
Not a whole lot. The idea would be it's part of the conspiracy.
Okay.
So there was some kind of video cover up. There were other assailants that were working on the behalf of the Bell brothers. But the storyline with the Bell brothers has really taken on legs. I know when I first told you I was working on this case, you said, oh, well, the Bell brothers.
Yeah.
You remembered hearing about them because their name has been brought up very early. As a matter of fact, I think they were brought up by KJ's grandfather on like day 3 after his death. I mean, this has been kind of their party line for quite a while, that
Right.
these are the two boys, or at least that family is responsible for the death of KJ.
But I will tell you, based upon what I'd heard previously, I assumed there was something there. This is the first I've heard there's alibis. There just seemed to be some evidence behind it. I had no idea that we kind of just grabbed these names out of thin air and went with it.
They really were never suspects. On one occasion, just due to community outcry, public outcry, their house was raided to try to find any evidence in the case, and there was nothing. Unfortunately, the community really kind of turned on the Bell family because of some death threats, and just because they felt very threatened, they had to relocate from Georgia to Florida. And this has really taken, a toll on the boys. And again, if I felt there was a chance they could be involved, I would not be saying this. But if they are innocent, they're victims in this as well.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, Brian was offered a football scholarship at Florida State University. And there was a petition that stated because of his possible involvement in KJ's murder, that scholarship should be rescinded. And sure enough, not long after, the head coach of Florida State University, Jimbo Fisher, called Lowndes High School and said that they would no longer be able to offer that scholarship to Brian. So it has affected their futures in pretty large ways.
And that's not fair because they too are teenage boys.
They too, yes.
Seem to be innocent of this, and yeah, you're right, it's really sad that they've also been victimized, because that's not fair.
And again, I'm not saying that was clearly an accident. I'm just saying if the Johnson family believes that KJ was murdered, I think they may be looking at the wrong suspects.
I'm with you.
So it's unfortunate to hear what's happened to them on that side of things. Now, the Johnson family has carried through on some pretty big lawsuits. First, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Lowndes County Board of Education, its superintendents, and the principal of Lowndes High School. The suit alleges that KJ was, quote, violently assaulted, severely injured, suffered great physical pain and mental anguish, and subjected to insult and loss of life on January 10th, 2013. And while this lawsuit doesn't specifically cite race as the reason that he was targeted and murdered, there's definitely an undertone of that. It alleges that the defendants were negligent and violated Johnson's constitutional rights to equal protection based on race. It alleges that the defendants ignored reports that previously KJ had been repeatedly attacked and harassed by white students.
But there's no evidence of that.
What they cite is the Bell brothers' harassment of KJ. They cite this scuffle that happened 14 months prior on a bus trip, and supposedly Brian had a, quote, history of provoking and attacking KJ. Again, they weren't able to find any other students to come forward and corroborate this. Now, that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Certainly, it may be the buddy system there. I'm not quite sure. They stated further in this lawsuit that officials failed to, quote, properly monitor the activities of students throughout all areas of campus and to maintain a properly functioning video surveillance system. In January of 2015, though, things got real. The Johnson family filed a $100 million civil lawsuit in the Superior Court of DeKalb County against 38 individuals. Respondents included 3 of Johnson's classmates, local, state, and federal officials, the school superintendent of Lowndes County, the Valdosta Lowndes Crime Lab, the police chief of Valdosta, many sheriff's deputies, the city of Valdosta, the state medical examiner, the GBI, and 5 of its agents, and 1 FBI agent. And of course, this FBI agent is Rick Bell. The lawsuit says that the FBI agent, Rick Bell, ordered his 2 sons, Braden and Brian Bell, and an additional classmate to attack KJ, and that his death was a murder. The lawsuit alleges that there was a conspiracy to cover up the homicide. Shortly after filing this lawsuit, there was an interview with Kenneth and Jackie Johnson, and unfortunately, they were not able to name many listed in this lawsuit or how they would have been involved in the conspiracy.
Which is unusual, I would think, unless it's literally just like I'm going to throw everything out there and see what sticks kind of thing.
I think if you feel it's a conspiracy, you have to include all of these people. Everyone has to be working together in order to pull this off.
You're right.
It also does make you wonder, how is it possible that all of these independent pieces can work together and no one comes forward and nobody spills the beans, so to say. But they really feel like this was all a orchestrated event by the Bell family, and they've got everybody else to kind of fall in line and follow suit. On March 10th, 2011, the case was officially reopened by Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk. Now, Polk was not playing around when he reopened this case. He put up a $500,000 reward of his own cash.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yes, and this was available for information leading the conviction of anybody who killed KJ. According to Polk, he and 2 other investigators pored over the case for 13 months before coming to this conclusion. On January 2022, this new investigation was closed with no charges filed. Polk released his findings saying, quote, "There was no homicide, no cover-up, no conspiracy in the January 2013 death of the teen. It was simply a tragic and bizarre accident." Polk stated that he would not be claiming there was something wrong with the original investigation or that the original investigation's conclusion of an accidental death was wrong. The sheriff also stated that he does not consider the case to be a homicide. He further stated that the 2 brothers, the Bell brothers, were not suspects and had never been suspects. In response to this, Kenneth Johnson said of Polk, quote, "He couldn't have dug deeply into the files to come up with the conclusion that he did."
Well, I think where I have to kind of land is no matter what happened, my heart really goes out to the Johnson family, who not only lost their son, but is obviously struggling to find closure. And, that's a horrific position to be in. I can only imagine. I don't know that I agree with some of their choices, but it sounds like they probably came from a place of grief And, my heart really goes out to them in that scenario. It kind of feels like it was an accident to me. But I have to say, there was enough weird stuff that gives me pause. And then the fact that, the coroner said, hey, the police screwed up. I mean, there is enough. It's not cut and dry for me.
I think that's absolutely the case. And I do think some of the steps the Johnson family has taken probably have come out of grief. And I think they may not have a lot of clarity per se. But again, this case itself doesn't have a lot of clarity. Even if you're in the accident side of things, that's not clear. It's not
No,
clear it's an accident.
no,
I think the most disappointing and really sad point is that this case is operating an environment of distrust. And that's what's made this case so polarizing is the Johnsons and really the Black community, they do not trust law enforcement. And that is very evident here. And even if they do feel like law enforcement is working on their side, they just have not fostered this relationship of teamwork and trust and care. And I'm not saying they're wrong to feel that way, but
sure.
it certainly does cloud everything that happens.
Yeah, yeah. You can't trust who you can't trust.
Right.
It's as simple as that. And if I can't trust you, then I can't trust you. So I get how when it comes to the loss of your child, that would play a major role.
And you feel like investigators are not looking out for your interest and your son's interest, and they may be trying to protect others. That must be a very lonely place to be.
Just to even for a moment try to put myself in that scenario where other people are covering up something terrible that happened to my child, I can't even put into words like what I feel, just even trying to empathize with being in that position. So yeah, no, it's horrific. It's horrific.
Yeah, it's really tough. Now, this is the first case of our month, so this is a Branch of Hope Foundation case. We use our Branch of Hope Foundation to show compassion and respect to victims and their loved ones. The Branch of Hope allows us to give back to the community, spread awareness and about unsolved crimes, and hopefully bring a little comfort and hope to those who need it. And in this case, it absolutely is a community that's hurting. Those on both sides. Those who feel like they're being accused of wrongdoing when they feel like they haven't, and then those that feel like their rights haven't been looked after and they haven't been treated with respect. It's very hard on both sides. Because of that, we've decided to sponsor the Kendrick Johnson Foundation Fund, and a portion of this does go to continuing to fight for clarity in the Kendrick Johnson case. I do hope that this helps his parents understand a little bit more about how their son came to his end and that they're able to get some kind of comfort from that. A portion of these funds also go towards educating schools on security and surveillance systems to make sure that all students are safe in their schools. This helps to protect from bullying, from intruders, and from school violence. And that's something that we can definitely get behind.
Oh, sure. This sounds like a great cause. I'm very happy to support it this month.
A portion of proceeds from our Patreon and sponsors will go directly to the Kendrick Johnson Foundation Fund. You can get involved by donating directly to this organization. Their information can be found on our website or on our social media platforms. You can also contribute by joining our Patreon, where you will not only get free content, but a portion of your subscription will go to support the Branch of Hope Foundation nonprofit organization of the month.
Please send us an email at thedarkoakpodcast@gmail.com. We are open to your questions, your comments, and anything else you want to share. And for other ways to connect, hop over to thedarkoak.com. Be sure to follow us to our next episode where we cover the disappearance of Robin Gardner, who disappeared while on a mysterious trip, we'll say, to Aruba.
A very peculiar trip to
was.
Aruba. You don't want to miss this one, guys.
You don't. So, show up.
Be there or be square.
You got it. You definitely don't want to miss it. Thanks for listening, Shiver Seekers. You rock.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.